Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Carol Ripley. I'm the Adult Services Librarian, and I'm very happy to have Cayce with us this afternoon. So this month is National Novel Writing Month, and we have the events today, and then also an event on November 12th about research in writing. So that's all I'll say, and I'll have Cayce take it away.
Thank you, Karen. My name is Cayce Osborne. I'll just tell you a little bit about me to start. I have a background in journalism. I was a staff writer for a magazine. When I was in college, I was a writing tutor for student athletes who needed a little extra help with all their travel for the team. I went to UW, and there was lots of travel teams that needed extra help to finish their papers and things, and that was a very fun job. I've always written in some format for myself or for work, but it wasn't until I was about to turn 40 that I thought, I've always wanted to write a book. I should probably try. Time is running out. So I gave it a try, and I started writing in 2015, and my first novel was published in 2023. So that was the journey, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that as I go through. But is anybody doing NaNoWriMo this month? NaNoWriMo, sorry, it's the National Novel Writing Month, where you try and write at least 50 to 60,000 words in the month of November.
So is that referenced on this?
That's just the reason that we're having these talks. It's just sort of in celebration of the month. And it's shortened to NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, if you want to look it up. And so for those of you who are doing it, are you using the website at all? So you're just independently kind of doing it? Because I just would caution you to whether or not you're using the website. Some of those services will have you put your writing on their website in order to help track your word count, but there are some tricky issues with AI and them using your writing to teach their AI. So if you're doing it, that's wonderful. I think it's great. I've done it too. I would just caution you to keep your own work for yourself and not put it out there for others to use. So yes. So before we start, just a friendly disclaimer, which I've written out here. I'm not gonna tell you that you have to do anything. I don't say this is a must in writing. This is the only way it works. Whatever works for you is what works for you. These are just suggestions, ideas, things to get your creativity flowing if you're stuck. That's what I'd like to talk about, is how to work through those moments when you are stuck. Has anybody ever been stuck trying to start something, not knowing quite where to start? Yeah. I feel like the single biggest piece of advice I've ever heard or ever given, and it's almost a cliche at this point, is if you don't know what to write about, you should read. Read as widely as you can, read in your genre, read out of your genre. There's great inspiration to be had in reading. I also personally like people watching, eavesdropping, taking road trips, and watching TV and movies. I'm a mystery writer. This is a mystery set in Madison. And I have found several times that I will be reading or watching a mystery TV show, and I will think I've got it all figured out. I think I know who did it. I can see the puzzle pieces coming together, feeling very clever, and then I'm completely wrong. But those ideas that I came up with trying to solve someone else's mystery, I've actually used in my own mysteries. So there's all sorts of ways that these things can get you thinking and brainstorming and just bringing up those ideas that you may not have occurred to you without these outside influences. One way I like to start writing a story is with a character. Sometimes you can build an entire book around just a character to start with. Figure out who you want to write about and let the plot evolve from there. Who are their friends? What do they do for a living? Are they in love? Who are their enemies? What trouble can you get them into? What secrets can you give them that they're keeping from the other characters? Has anybody ever heard of One Story, the short story magazine? They print out these beautiful little pamphlets and they'll send them to you each month, and they only print one story a month. And they're a great organization. They do lots of philanthropy, and they also run classes, which I've taken several of. You can do them online at your own pace, just at onestory.com. And one of the tricks I learned there for getting unstuck was do an online tarot card reading for your character. I'm not into tarot myself, but it was a fun exercise to think, what are the cards saying for my character? And how would that affect where I want the story to go? I've written down a resource that you can use if you wanted to try drawing the cards for your character. But if not a character, your story can really start anywhere. Anything that inspires you can start the story. A setting, a scrap of dialogue you've overheard while eavesdropping on other people, a scene that pops into your head, that happens for me a lot, one specific inciting incident that sets the whole ball rolling, or just a relationship between two or more people that may be fraught or complicated or romantic, whatever it is that you are writing. That relationship can bloom out into an entire book or short story. Does anyone write stories instead of books? Or both? Yeah. So these things can be used for smaller scale pieces or bigger. I would say don't wait for motivation to come to you. If you wait for the conditions to be perfect, they're never going to be perfect. That was part of my problem when I was trying to start writing, is that I thought, I have a newborn, I could never write. Oh, I have a toddler, I could never write. Oh, I have a full-time job, there's no way I could write. Oh, my life is too busy, I've got deadlines at my job, I could never write. Well, if you keep saying never, it's going to be never. So, so just sit down and write, even if it's not perfect, even if you think it's silly, the best way to do it is to sit down and start. And this is a quote I've heard several places. If you're not sure what your book is about, the best way to figure it out is by writing it. And that's why I encourage messy first drafts, because sometimes you have to get all of that out of you and pare it back later, rather than worrying about every word that you put down will be perfect. That's another way to stall yourself as you're going. How many people here outline their stories before they write? A few, yeah. Different people work different ways. I am not too much of an outliner, but sometimes if you're getting stalled, it helps to think ahead in the story and write those plots out, so you're not sitting down to a totally blank page every day. You at least have some idea where the story is going to go. Does anybody else have any tips for how to start? Any thoughts? Please feel free to interrupt or raise a hand.
One thing that just came to mind, not my idea, but when you're talking about inspiring activities, is that Nelson Algren, author who's wrote The Man with the Golden Arm and a lot of stuff from the great author, he would go to Chicago Circuit Court and sit there all day and watch the petty criminals.
Nice.
A lot of his
Yeah,
stories
that's
were
great.
like street life stuff, so he would do that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's perfect. Yeah, I mean, it's important. Sorry, go ahead.
As far as just getting going, if you're working on like a novel or something, for myself, I have no idea what so I'll sit down and I'll just start reading what I wrote, and then at some point that might kick me into like continuing it or going off on a tangent.
Yeah, rereading what you've just written helps, especially if you've left your piece alone for a while and you need to kind of get back oriented into the headspace of what you've been writing. Especially in the beginning, for me, I was grabbing pieces of time here and there to write whenever I could. And so often 2 weeks would go by and I hadn't touched my manuscript. And so that is very helpful to reread, sort of get back into the groove, basically. That's a great suggestion. So we'll move on to middles, unless anyone else has anything else to say about beginnings. Okay. I tried writing novels several times before I ever finished one. And I would say the transition from beginning to middle is where I would stall out, because I would lose confidence in my ideas. I would think, this is stupid, no one's gonna wanna read this. I don't know where it's gonna end up yet, why should I keep going? There were all these things that were talking me out of writing. And I think the middle is where that can sort of start, you can start to lose your confidence, at least in my experience. And as I was saying before, when I was about to turn 40, I thought, this is perfect. I'll use that as my finish line. And I'm gonna write a novel. And I don't care if it's stupid. And I don't care if it doesn't make sense. I don't care if it's a messy first draft. It should be a messy first draft. I'm just gonna prove to myself that I can do this. And that's exactly what I did. That novel did not sell. It did not get published, but I proved to myself that I could actually do it. And every novel after that has been easier to write because there was no more question about, can I do it? I knew I could do it. I just had to do it again. We were talking about going back and reading a little bit to get back in the groove. But I find personally that I don't like to edit as I write. What do you guys think? Do you guys edit as you write, or do you just write your drafts? A little bit of both?
I unfortunately edit as I write.
Yeah. It's not unfortunate if it works for you. For me, I would find that I would just get wrapped up in the editing and I wouldn't have any forward motion. Good, good. Yes, see exactly. That if it works for you, it works. But I think if you do too much second guessing of what's already on the page, then that can lead to that loss of confidence or confusion about what's going on. I think as long as you're making forward progress, that's great. Whatever works for you will work. There in the back of this handout, I've got a list of craft books, suggestions of things that I've read or that have been recommended. And I read this in one of them. On any given day, you're not writing a novel. You're writing a scene, you are exploring a character, you are working through a plot point. Don't let the larger project overwhelm your daily writing. I think that's excellent advice. Because ultimately, it's a day-by-day or even hour-by-hour process to finish a novel. So as long as you concentrate on what's right in front of you and sort of let the other pressures lessen and don't dwell on, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to write 40,000 more words. Today's words are what's important. And those, even if you write 20 words, if you write 20 every day, they'll add up to a novel eventually. And it's one word at a time. If word count goals work for you, that's excellent. Set a goal of 500 or 1,000 words a day and see if you can meet that every day. Some people like to do time goals. I want to write for 1 hour every day. I know people who wake up at 5 a.m. so they can get their hour or 2 hours in before their full-time jobs. I'm not a morning person, so I do not do that. But I also have to get the kids up for school in the morning and get them, fed breakfast, pack their lunches, all that great stuff. So for me, it's lunch hours, sitting at the karate studio waiting for my kids' class to finish, or weekends. Those are the times that I'm able to grab. And I think it's been my experience that the less time I have to write, the more importantly I take those chunks of time that I do have. I often will get stuck in a scene that I'm writing, and I don't know how to end that scene. And my brain will say, you have to finish this before you can move on. You have to figure out what these characters are going to do, what their conversation is going to be. But there's no reason you can't just skip it and go to the next scene. Or 3 chapters down, what's the next big thing that's going to happen that you're excited about writing? I think if you're stuck and you know that there's something down the line that will be exciting to you to write, just go write that. You don't have to write in a linear fashion. I think it works for a lot of people to do that because their brains are trained on stories, and so we all progress through them in a similar way, start to finish. But I think, if there's something that's calling to you, like you can't wait to get to this certain scene and the scene you're writing now isn't working and you're grumpy about it and you just want to leave it alone, it's okay to leave it alone. Go somewhere else and write what's interesting. There's no timeline for what we're doing. There's no deadline for these novels. If you are writing National Novel Writing Month, there is a goal that's set for you. But other than that, there's nothing that tells us we have to rush through this. So take your time. You want to arrive at a great book. You don't want to be the fastest person on earth to write a book. So whatever time it takes, it takes. And I find I get a certain urgency, especially if I'm getting close to the end or if I'm thinking about publishing this book? How will I do that? What's the process going to be like? You know, my mind is racing ahead to the afters, and it makes me want to go too quickly through where I am at that moment. And I think it's never going to be a better book for hurrying. You know, take your time, give the story, you know, its due. And if you feel like you're going off on a tangent in your book, let yourself, because the first draft is a rough draft, and you never know what's going to make it into the final version and what won't. So, you know, let yourself experiment. Let your characters do a crazy thing, do a writing exercise. You know, there's different character questionnaires you can find online. You know, what would your character eat for breakfast? What's their favorite holiday? Those sorts of things. Take a break from the writing. Do something like that that will inform your story and your character to sort of just keep your mind thinking about all this stuff. And when you don't have time to actually write, I find that my book always lives in my head, and I can think about it wherever I am or whatever I'm doing, and it always helps further the story, even if I'm not sitting down in front of my computer. Does anybody have any tricks for middles that they'd like to share? Any thoughts about getting through that?
Only problems.
The slog? Only problems. What's a problem?
Well, I have problems getting from scene to scene. So I'll write something and then I'll write something else, but then like, how do you get to the next one?
Yeah. So I recently read a book called Refuse to be Done by Matt Bell, which is in the list of craft books, which was excellent. And he talks about something called writing. He quotes somebody else, and I'm not going to remember who he quoted, but writing to the islands. So basically, you're writing these islands of ideas, right? These scenes, and first drafts, you don't need to worry about the connections. You can go from island to island, get all your islands in a row, and then go back and think about, you know, what are these characters doing in between the scenes? Are they sleeping? Are they, you know, having dinner with their mom? You know, just sort of, you can connect them in a way that feels human and natural. But especially in a first draft, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I know a lot of writers who will just come to the end of a scene and just figure this out later. And then, of course, they're the ones that have to figure it out later. But if it's too much in the moment, you know, you can let it go, especially if you feel like it's impeding your progress and not letting you get any further. Yeah.
I was going to say, a couple of times when I've started writing, I really love the beginning, and all of a sudden I lose complete interest in the character.
Yeah.
I think, why would I ever want to write this book? It's just boring.
Yes, that's exactly the type of loss of confidence that I've felt before. And it happened in every single project that I started until I just told myself, it doesn't matter what this book is, if it's any good, if the character's likable, if anyone ever reads it. I just need to finish it because I want to prove to myself I could do it. And it sort of unlocked something, because it taught me that first draft doesn't have to be anything but finished. And I can go back and fix all those things. I can make the character more dynamic. I can do something in the beginning to make the reader want to root for them and carry that through the story. So I totally understand that feeling, and I've had it many times. But I think the more you do it, and when you prove to yourself that you can get past that crisis point, that it'll get easier. Yeah.
When I get really mired in the middle of a story, I take myself on a really long walk in a beautiful place, and walking the movement of the left and right brain, and looking at birds and trees and the solitude of that really creates a different environment in your brain.
Yeah.
And then it may not push you forward in a writerly way, but it puts you, it removes you for enough time to then refresh your brain, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of go back to it. But I think the natural world is a great place to find that.
Yeah, I agree. And also that physical movement. I find that I have lots of little ideas in the shower, and I think it's because I'm just mechanically doing, I always do things in the same order. You know, I wash my hair, and then I put the conditioner in, then I wash my face and do that. You know, it's just sort of by rote, and I don't think about it, but I'm doing it, and so then my mind is free to do other things. I think it's a similar thing with walking, but even better because you've got the whole world to look at and think about. Yeah. Agreed. All right, who gets stuck at the end? Anybody get stuck at the end? Yeah.
If I get there.
If you get, yeah, you will get there, yeah. And that's kind of the thing, like endings have a lot of pressure, right? It's the way you're gonna leave your reader, what's gonna linger in their mind about the book usually is how you end it. And people talk about a satisfying ending. Oh, I love that book, but the ending, it just didn't, it wasn't quite right for me, which is why we all feel a lot of pressure to write a good ending. And I think on a first draft, it doesn't have to be a good ending. It just has to end. Just do something. Just, the first thing that comes to your mind. A lot of people talk about, your first instinct in a scene will probably be the most predictable one. And so you want to think about your second or third or fourth instinct for a character and what they will do to make it more surprising for your readers. But I think in a rough draft, you can use that first instinct. Just get it down on paper, and then as you revise, you will read and you will arrive at a better ending, or your ending will evolve, and as you shape the story as a whole, you'll end up with an ending that feels right for the finished story, which may be different from the ending that feels right for the rough draft story. You never know. Are you guys familiar with the yes and idea from improv? From improv comedy, the yes and idea. So basically, if you're in an improv troupe and you're on stage and someone says, "I am a purple ostrich," their partner has to say, "Yes, you are," and you're wearing a tutu. You sort of build on whatever what came before, and make it feel real and flesh out that idea. Don't say no, say yes, basically, is the idea. And I think you can use that for novels as well. You can look at what you've written so far and say, okay, this is the yes, now what's the and? What feels natural to what I've written? What's the progression? Where do these characters end up? How do the conflicts resolve? Use what you've already written as a guide. And it's always, revision is where everything happens, right? You can always change it later. And your instincts will tell you if you've written something that isn't right. And there is no right or wrong way to end a first draft. All you have to do, you just have to end it. Whatever keeps you writing. That's the number one rule of the first draft. That is also from Refused to be Done by Matt Bell, which is my new favorite craft book, by the way. It's never wrong if it keeps you writing. And I also love this quote from Amy Tan. "Only when I finish the book can I go back to the beginning and write in the voice of all that happened." And I find that that's very true, because by the time I get to the end, I have all these ideas for the book to improve it, how things may need to change, how characters may need to make a different choice in a specific situation, so that it all hangs together as something that makes sense. Does anybody else have anything to say about endings? Should we talk a little bit about revision then? So now the real work begins, right? You've written a draft, it's all on the paper, now you've got to pick it apart and find the pieces of gold that are in there. Sometimes I feel like you don't know what your book is really about until you get to that point, until it's all down. That writing process can teach you what you're really writing about, especially if you let yourself sort of freely meander within the draft and go in directions that may not fit the story, but your instincts are leading you there. You can find those pieces and zoom out and look at it as a whole and figure out where the book should go. And now is the time then to prune down all those extra words. You don't want to keep more words than you need just to make a word count that you're trying to hit. Your scene should be only as long as they need to be and be as concise as you can. When I was tutoring athletes in college and just after college, this girl came to me and she had a paper that she was very proud of. She had finished it and we were going to go over it and I was going to help her finalize it. And I started to read it and nothing made sense. The sentences didn't hang together. I had no idea what she was trying to say. I wouldn't have even been able to tell what subject it was. And it's because she wrote it in her like plain speaking voice, and then she got out a thesaurus and changed almost every word to something that sounded smarter. And it was incoherent. And I think there's an insecurity a lot of us feel where we have to sound smart, but really being clear and to the point and communicating the image that's in your head onto the paper in a concise, simple way is really the best way to communicate with a reader. And those $10 words are probably just going to get in your way. Have you ever heard the phrase, kill your darlings? Kill your darlings. So if you're writing something and you have this sentence that you just think is beautiful, it's the best sentence you've ever written, and it, maybe it doesn't quite fit the story or the conversation your characters are having, but gosh, isn't it pretty? Sometimes you get so attached to these little bits in your story or your book that probably are beautiful and are great, but are they right for the story? That's one of those things in revision you have to figure out what are the things that serve the story, not necessarily are the things that you would point to and say this is my best writing. Terry Pratchett is famous for saying the first draft is just you telling yourself the story. And I think a lot of what I've already said speaks to that. You need to know what your book is about before you can sit down and shape it into the book you want it to be. You want to figure out the best, clearest way to tell your reader how these things happen. You know everything that happens now in your book once you finish it. But what is the best way for you to communicate those things? I think, some of us overwrite, which means, we write way more words than the novel will end up having, or we underwrite. We write fewer words than the novel will end up having. And depending on your style, you sort of meet in the middle at the word count you want to arrive at. And so you're going to either be fleshing out those scenes to communicate, or you're going to be paring down those extra words to make it clear and put these images that you've dreamed up into the reader's mind. How many of you have beta readers that you can rely on to read your stuff? Anybody? It's very important to find someone that you trust when you're ready to show your work and they can tell, because sometimes we get so tangled up on our own minds and we think we're communicating things clearly, but really we haven't gotten all that information on the page yet. So I would encourage you to, I'm sure the libraries, wherever you live, this library or others can help facilitate writing groups. A lot of them do. As much as I don't like social media, I've found lots of great writing groups on social media.
We have a writing group that meets at this library.
Oh, beautiful.
I'm part of it, the moderator, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And so that, we've been doing it. There's a flyer for it out there. We've been doing it mostly every second Tuesday of every month at about 5:45, just so that we can get out at 7:45. Thanks to the library or something. And so it's just open to whoever.
That's great. Yeah. And there's local writers organizations in your genre or in your geographical area that you can join and find people to just read your work and give good feedback on what's working and what isn't working. And I have used friends as beta readers before, especially in the beginning, and I will tell you that friends do not make the best beta readers because they're your friends and they'll say, this is amazing, it's so good. And you'll feel so great when they say that. And then you'll realize they didn't say one bad thing. And there's no way that there isn't at least one bad thing or one thing that doesn't make sense. And they're being kind, but kind isn't what you need, unfortunately. So the perfect beta reader will be constructive and honest and not harsh, and will know how to deliver that news to you in a way that will help you rather than hurt your feelings. But you don't have to take their advice. They're not always right. So use your gut to decide, okay, my readers have told me that they think I should take this character out of my book. And I don't know if I really believe that. Or, my readers are telling me that my character is unlikable. Well, okay, do I want her to be likable? Is that important? I mean, you want your readers to want to read your book and root for your character, but does that necessarily mean likable? So just sort of use your gut and your instincts to analyze all of this feedback that you get, and make sure that it also matches the book you want to be writing. Because if you're not confident in your book, no one else is going to be either. And I think the best way to arrive at that is just to be clear with these readers what you want. Do you want them to read for every little grammar mistake? Do you want them to just tell you if your characters are working? Do they want you want to know about your dialogue? Whatever piece it is that you would like them to read for, just be clear and specific, and then they can give you the feedback that you really need. So I was just telling Christine earlier that I have been working on a book, and I thought I was finished. But there was something about it that was bothering me, and I hadn't figured out what it was yet. And I realized I was making my characters' lives too easy. And when everything goes right for a character, they're not really that interesting to read about. Because, nothing goes right for everyone, right? And so I ended up adding a subplot that complicated my characters, and it worked out much better. So one thing that I find on a lot of my first drafts is I make my characters' lives too easy. So if there's ways you can complicate it for them, throw a roadblock in their way, give them a secret that they're keeping from their partner or their mom or someone that the reader knows about, but the other characters don't, it can sort of enhance the intricacy of the plot and make it feel more real and more of a journey throughout the book rather than just a linear story. And as we talked about before, I think going back a little bit in your manuscript and starting something you've already done, if you get at a sticking point, like if you hit a scene that you don't know how to revise, just go back a little, reread something that you've already revised, and it might get you into the groove. That's another way to get past a revision sticking point. And this, I said in the beginning that I wasn't going to tell you never to do anything, but I'm going to do it now. If you cut something out of your draft, don't throw it away. I usually use just a Word doc or a Google Doc where I collect all my scrap bits. I usually call it scrap bits. And I throw everything I cut out of the book there because I never know if I'm going to need something again. I think it's only once or twice I've actually used anything from my scrap bits document. But I think the most valuable thing about that document is that it will make you braver about cutting because nothing will ever go away permanently. You'll always be able to find it again if you regret and want to go back. So that is the one time I will say you should probably do this. And then my trick for finishing is to read my book out loud to myself. There are all sorts of things you will hear as a reader reading it than just your eyes looking across the page. I also like to print it out and read it through that way with a red pen. There's all sorts of ways to trick your brain into getting out of your writing mode on whatever device you usually use to write and switch into finalizing mode, which will let you sort of see all those little things you missed any other way. And I will just say, to finish that part, writing is not a talent, it's a craft. It's not something you're born able to do. It's not something that only an elite few people can do. It's something you work at and something that you can improve at. And the more you practice, the more you read, the more you hit these walls and break through them, the better you'll be. And I did include, as I said, a list of craft books, if you're interested in looking any of them up. These are all books that either I've read or that writers I know have told me are great. And that Refused to Be Done by Matt Bell, which is my current favorite, is on here. And I would recommend, if you get stuck or you're looking for a new inspiration or just a new method, like if you feel like all the little things you're doing aren't working, reading a craft book is a great way to try something different. And on the last page, I won't talk through it, but it's a little story building trick to try if you get stuck. It's basically just building a story from the feet up. The feet, the knees, the guts, the heart, the head, all the beats of a story. And then if you start with one sentence for each of those story points, you can then bloom them out into full scenes and rich detail and all that stuff. And it's a great way to sort of like, especially if you're an instinct writer or a non-outliner, some people call it a pantser, right? If you've ever heard that, writing by the seat of your pants. Especially if you're exclusively one of those, this is a fun exercise to try to sort of build an outline and see if that works for you. And that is it, unless anyone has any questions or anything you want to talk about.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How many books have you finished, but not necessarily published?
So before this one, I wrote 4. I think I was trying to find my genre. The first one I wrote was YA, and then I wrote sort of a historical, and then I wrote a sci-fi, and then I wrote a women's fiction. And I noticed as I was writing these that every single one of them had an element of mystery or something suspenseful that was driving the plot that the characters were trying to figure out. And I finally just said to myself, I'm putting mystery into all these books. Why don't I just write a mystery? And so that was this one. And I've written, one is finished after this, and then I'm finishing that one I was talking about earlier. So yeah, I mean, it was 7 or 8 years of writing novels, trying to figure out what my voice was, what my genre was, and also, in that time I had 2 different literary agents, both of whom put my books out on sub, neither of which sold. And then, now I'm currently unagented because the agent I had for my women's fiction novel didn't really dig this one, which makes sense because it's not women's fiction, and just didn't know how to sell it, and so I sold it myself.
Can you talk more about selling it yourself?
Sure, yeah, and if anybody has questions about like queries, or I don't know what Christine went over exactly in her talk, I don't want to double up, too much, but agents, queries, publishing, any questions, I'm totally fine. So yeah, I had queried, I want to say probably 20 or so agents with this book, and I was getting a lot of the same feedback, which was I really like it, but I don't quite know how to sell it. And I think this is my writing curse, is that I don't write straight genre books. I write books that are sort of muddy genres, like a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I like to say, I don't write whodunits, but I write what the heck is going on here books. Like characters trying to figure out what's happening. In this book, a woman picks up a best-selling novel and it spills all of her childhood secrets in the book. So it's not necessarily a murder book, it's more about why is someone telling all her secrets that she's kept hidden for 30 years. In the book after that, it's, someone bought a property and they're in love with this piece of land, but someone is trying to scare them off the land. So my books don't always have the classic like dead body mystery. They're more like something's going on here and the characters need to figure it out. But those can be a tough sell for agents who want something that they can immediately look at and say, I know exactly how to sell this. Unfortunately, I don't write those books. So I started researching publishers that will take submissions directly from writers. And Crooked Lane Books is the one who bought this, and they are a crime fiction specialized imprint. I say that getting published is a lot of luck, but you have to work really hard to put yourself in the position to be lucky. And I sent it in and the right editor read it on the right day. So after 7 years and then probably 6 months of querying this book, from the time I sent it to Crooked Lane till the time I had a book deal was 5 days. So it's slow until it's not slow. And then it took a year for it to come out after that, so. Yep.
Do you outline?
I outline a little. I usually start with a character or sometimes even just an opening line just sort of get into the voice. And I sometimes I'll write like a first chapter just to sort of figure out how, it's almost always with a character for me, how the character is going to present themselves to the reader. And then I'll sort of pause and try and build a plot around them. And at that point, I will outline a little bit. Sometimes I use index cards. I have some with a little a hole punched up in the corner and a little ring on it. And then I'll just write sort of scenes that come to me. And the reason I like that is because if I write them out of order, I can shuffle them back around to the right order. So it's a very loose outline and it's not detailed. But at least I find that if I have ideas swimming around in my head and I don't get them down, I'll lose them or I'll lose like momentum, and it will stop me from getting new ideas coming in. So I want to get those ideas out, down onto an outline or an index card or something, or even just my Google Doc, so that I can then let the other ideas come in.
Is your second novel out? Is it?
No, it's not. I'm trying to sell it right now. Yep. So, fingers crossed. Thank you.
You know, what, in that novel, I know what you did.
Yes.
What was the first thought you had that made you even want to write that?
It was the character. I had been writing, as I said, trying to figure out my genre, but all my characters, were not me, but when they were given a dilemma or had to make a decision, I would think, okay, I want to make this realistic. So what would I do in this situation? And that's how I would write it. But then I realized that it became uninteresting to me. And so I decided as a writing exercise, I would come up with a character and write a little bit, even just a character study type thing, of someone who did the opposite of what I would do in almost every situation. Like that Seinfeld episode where George decides to do the opposite of every instinct he has, and he has this huge success. Anyway, so that's what I did, and that's how the character came about. I mean, she's nothing like me. She's super sarcastic, and she hates everyone, and she wants to be alone, and she has all this trauma in her past that I don't have. But she was so interesting to me. And so then I thought, okay, people aren't going to like her. So how do I make her likable? And so I came up with a scene in the beginning where I thought would be sympathetic, which was she's in the gynecologist's office. And without going too much into the plot of this book, which is not interesting, I will just say that it was definitely the character, and I wondered what trouble she would get into. And then I read Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz, which is also a really good miniseries. And there's this trick that he does in the beginning of that book where you start reading and you think you're reading the Anthony Horowitz book, but really you're reading the book within the book. You're reading the manuscript that this editor has found. And I thought that was so cool. I want to do something like that, but not trick the reader, trick my character. So that is where the book that she finds all of her secrets in, that's where that comes in. So it was those two things. It was the character, and it was that trick of like a book within a book.
Yeah, so I loved your beginning of that book, but that's not really where you started. You started with the whole character.
The character, yep. And then after the character, I thought, okay, I need to put her in a funny, relatable situation, and that's how I came up with the scene in the beginning. Yeah. Yep. Anybody else?
Also in that book, I'm from Madison, so I just loved the references to Madison. I mean, that was like a character in itself to me.
Yeah, that was one of my favorites about writing it, and the reason I set it in Madison was because she was so different than me that I thought I should ground it in something that was very familiar to me, ground her somewhere that was very familiar, and so that's why I set it in Madison. And it was great fun coming up with, what businesses or restaurants I might name drop or what locations she might go to. And there was somewhere where I used to play as a child that is sort of the climax of the book. That's where it takes place. I won't give it away. But, you know, there's all these great things from my own experience that I could bring to it, even though she was so different than me.
I'm glad you said that, because I just made up in my mind that she was like you.
Yeah, no. Who did I meet? I met someone after they read the book, and I forget who it was now, but I was talking to them for 5 minutes, and they said, gosh, I just thought you were going to be so much more sarcastic. Just like so much more like hard-edged and sort of brash and, you know, no nonsense. I'm like, no, I'm not, definitely not me. Sometimes I think the things that she might say out loud, but I don't say them. Well, thank you so much, everybody. My email and my website are at the top of the sheet that you have. If you have any questions or want to get in touch or want to talk writing, I will take any opportunity to talk about writing. So, yeah. Thank you.